She stood in front of millions of people every single morning, composed, warm, completely unshakable. Savannah Guthrie had built something rare in this business, a career that felt both powerful and deeply personal. The kind of presence that made viewers feel like they were sitting across the kitchen table from a trusted friend, rather than watching one of the most influential anchors in American television. But behind that polished desk, behind the carefully timed smiles and the breaking news alerts and the interviews that rewrote headlines, something was quietly unfolding in her private world that she never planned for anyone to see. This wasn't a career scandal, it wasn't a professional controversy. It was something far more intimate, far more layered, and in many ways far more human than anything she had ever been asked to cover on air. Her daughter Annie. A little girl who came into the world surrounded by love, who grew up watching her mother interview presidents and bear witness to history in real time, who had absolutely no idea she was about to become part of a story that would move millions of complete strangers to tears. Because what happened between Savannah Guthrie and her daughter Annie, and the moment it quietly spilled out into the open, was never supposed to come out at all. It was a private moment. A mother and daughter moment, the kind that belongs to kitchen conversations and bedtime whispers, not to trending topics and comment sections. But it did come out. And when it did, the reaction was something nobody anticipated, not the internet, not the people who shared it, and not even Savannah herself. This is the story behind that moment, the real story. And it begins long before the cameras ever found her, long before the morning show desk, and long before the world had any reason to know her name. There are people who seem like they were simply made for television. You watch them and something clicks, something in the way they hold themselves, the way they listen, the way they speak without ever seeming to perform. Savannah Guthrie is one of those people. But what most viewers don't realize is that television almost wasn't the path she chose at all. And to truly understand why the story of her and Annie hit the world the way it did, you have to understand who she is beneath the broadcast, where she came from, what shaped her, and what she has always fought quietly and fiercely to protect. She isn't just a morning show anchor, she's a trained lawyer, a seasoned journalist. A woman of deep faith who has spoken honestly about vulnerability, about the cost of living publicly while raising children who deserve to live privately. She is someone who has always understood the difference between what the world gets to see and what belongs only to her. So when something deeply personal broke through the surface, it didn't go viral simply because it was surprising. It went viral because it was real. Because it touched something people recognized in themselves, something they had felt in their own quiet moments that they never expected to see reflected back from a television screen. This is her story and Annie's, and the moment that was never meant to leave the room. Long before the morning show desk, before the live election coverage and the presidential press conferences and the interviews that made front pages, Savannah Guthrie was just a girl from a small Arizona town, trying to figure out which direction her life was supposed to go. She grew up in Tucson in a household shaped by faith and by family, and by loss that arrived far too early. Her father passed away when she was very young, and that kind of grief, the kind that finds you before you even have the language to describe it, has a way of quietly rewriting a person from the inside. It didn't break her, but it gave her something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. A certain seriousness about what mattered, a radar for what was real, a refusal to waste time on anything hollow. She was sharp in a way that other people noticed before she fully recognized it in herself. The kind of person who could walk into any conversation and not just keep up, but redirect it somewhere more precise, more honest, more meaningful. She pursued law first. She earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Arizona, then pushed straight through to Georgetown Law, passed the bar, and began building a career with the kind of structured determination that lawyers are trained to have. Everything pointed in one clear direction, and then the pull started. It wasn't a sudden decision, it was persistent. A quiet and growing need to be where the story actually was, not reading the transcript afterward, not filing the brief after the fact, but standing in the middle of the moment. Asking the questions, holding the space for truth when the pressure was highest. She made the leap, and it was not easy. Walking away from a law career to start over in broadcasting meant proving yourself from scratch in a room full of people who had been doing this their entire lives. It meant early mornings and small markets and the kind of invisible grinding that never makes the highlight reel. She covered courts. She covered crime. She worked the local news circuit with the relentless precision of someone who had been trained to find the thread in a mountain of information and pull it cleanly into the light. But what separated her from the beginning, what people who worked beside her kept noticing, wasn't just how sharp she was. It was how genuinely warm she was, how curious. How she could sit across from anyone, powerful or guarded or frightened, and somehow make them feel safe enough to speak the truth. That combination, legal precision wrapped in real human empathy, was something that can't be taught. And it was already there, fully formed, long before anyone outside Arizona had ever heard her name. None of what was coming was guaranteed yet. There were still quiet years ahead. Still moments where the road forward wasn't visible. Still a version of Savannah Guthrie who was simply working, showing up, and building something one careful story at a time. And in those same quieter years, she was also beginning to imagine a life beyond the professional. A family, a home. Something that would belong entirely to her own private world, away from every camera and every headline. She just didn't know yet how completely that part of the story would come to define her. There is a moment in every major career when everything that came before it stops looking like struggle and starts looking like preparation. For Savannah Guthrie, that moment arrived when she stepped into national broadcasting and felt, perhaps for the first time, that every skill she had built quietly and painstakingly over years was suddenly being used all at once. She joined NBC News and was assigned to cover the White House. That is not a gentle entry point. That is one of the most demanding, high-stakes, high-visibility beats in all of American journalism, a place where being sharp is the minimum requirement. Where being fast and accurate and fearless isn't celebrated, it's simply expected every single day in front of the entire country. And she didn't just survive it, she thrived. Her coverage was clear and precise, her questions had edges. She didn't perform confidence, she carried it naturally, the way people do when competence has been built through years of actual work rather than optics. Network executives noticed. Colleagues noticed, and perhaps most importantly, audiences noticed. But the moment that truly altered the entire arc of what her career would become, the shift that moved her from respected journalist to something closer to a national presence, came when she joined the Today Show. Morning television operates by completely different rules than hard news. It demands a range that is genuinely rare. In the span of a single commercial break, you might need to pivot from a serious political interview to a celebrity profile, to a cooking demonstration, to a story so human and tender that it leaves people quietly crying over breakfast. Most people can do one or two of those things with skill. Very few can move across all of them and make every single transition feel natural and unhurried. Savannah could, she always could. She brought something to that desk that viewers responded to almost immediately, a grounded warmth combined with real intelligence. A woman who laughed easily and cried genuinely and pushed back when she needed to, and who never for a single moment appeared to be playing a role. America trusted her, and ratings reflected that trust in numbers that mattered. What had started as a career built in law school lecture halls and small market newsrooms had transformed into something that placed her voice and her face inside the homes of millions of people every single morning of their lives. But something unexpected was happening at the same time. Even as her professional world was reaching heights that would have been difficult to imagine from those early Arizona newsrooms, her personal world was undergoing its own quieter and more important transformation. She married, she became a mother. And those two versions of herself, the anchor the country watched and the woman living privately behind that image, began existing in a careful, deliberate tension that she navigated with an intentionality most viewers never fully saw. Because Savannah Guthrie had always been clear about exactly one thing: her children were not part of the broadcast, her family was her own. And she intended to keep it that way for as long as she possibly could. Which is exactly what makes what happened later, and the moment Annie stepped into the center of a story the whole world saw, so completely remarkable. When you watch Savannah Guthrie at her best, you are watching someone who has fully grown into everything she was always quietly becoming. The Today Show became the stage where her full range finally had room to breathe. She interviewed sitting presidents and first ladies. She anchored the network's coverage of national tragedies, the kind of broadcasts where there is no script and no safety net, and the entire country is watching to see if someone can hold steady. She sat across from celebrities at the peak of their public lives and asked the questions that everyone wanted answered, but that most interviewers were too careful or too comfortable to actually say out loud. And then there was the moment that tested not just her, but the entire institution she represented. When the Matt Lauer story broke, it didn't just shake the Today Show, it cracked it open in front of everyone. The response to that kind of institutional rupture can define a career permanently in one direction or another. She stepped forward and she didn't flinch. She didn't speak around it or soften the edges or deliver carefully managed language that said everything and nothing at the same time. She addressed it with a directness and a visible steadiness that reminded every person watching exactly what they had always trusted about her, that when the moment was hardest, she would not disappear into professionalism. She would simply tell the truth. That courage earned her something that ratings alone never could. It deepened the respect people felt for her in a way that became permanent. She also began, carefully and in small measures, opening windows into her own life. Not wide, never wide, but enough. She spoke about faith and what it had meant to her during difficult seasons. She talked about how becoming a mother had changed her relationship with fear, had restructured her sense of what was worth protecting. She reflected honestly on what it costs a person to live so publicly while raising children who are entirely entitled to live privately. And audiences felt that honesty in a way that went beyond the morning show. It built something real between her and the people watching. But here is what tends to get lost when people catalog the professional achievements. She didn't succeed in spite of the balancing act. She succeeded because of who she fundamentally was, a person who had never stopped being genuinely curious, never stopped caring about truth in its most unpolished form, never stopped showing up with everything she had for the stories she was trusted to carry. And in her private world, she was building something she held even more carefully than any career milestone: her daughter Annie, her son Charlie. A family she surrounded with a fierce and quiet protection that anyone who had watched her closely over the years could feel even without it ever being stated directly. She would mention them in brief passing moments, a small anecdote, a funny exchange, just enough warmth to let viewers feel the edges of that life without ever pulling the curtain fully back. Because for Savannah Guthrie, the line between what was public and what was private was never casual. It was a value. A deliberate and deeply considered boundary, drawn by a woman who knew better than almost anyone what the full weight of public attention could do to a person who was not yet old enough to choose it for themselves. And then something happened that crossed that line, not violently, not harmfully, in a way that was deeply, quietly, unexpectedly beautiful. It started the way so many things start in modern life. In a moment that was private, ordinary, completely unremarkable from the outside, the kind of moment that happens in households everywhere and vanishes without a trace. Savannah's daughter Annie, still young, still at that age where children see the world without filters and say what they observe without calculating the consequences, had been watching her mother. Not watching her on television, watching her in the way children watch their parents, closely, constantly, absorbing details that adults don't realize they're broadcasting. She had been watching her mother prepare. Watching her move through the enormous invisible machinery of a life that required showing up sharp and composed and fully present for an entire nation, day after day, without visible strain. And Annie had something to say about what she saw. What unfolded in that private moment, and the quiet path it took into the world beyond their home, carried an emotional weight that stopped people mid-scroll when it finally surfaced online. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was devastatingly simple. It wasn't about Savannah the anchor. It had nothing to do with ratings or influence or the decades of professional achievement that the outside world measured her by. It was about Savannah the mother. Seen clearly, completely, and without any agenda, through the honest and uncomplicated eyes of her own child. There is something about being truly seen by someone who loves you without condition, without performance, without the slightest awareness of who the world has decided you are. That breaks through every layer of composure a person has spent years carefully constructing. Savannah Guthrie, a woman who had sat across from some of the most powerful figures on the planet without her voice wavering. A woman who had anchored the nation through moments of genuine crisis with her composure fully intact, was quietly and completely undone by a little girl who simply said what she felt. And the world felt it too. The response was immediate and deeply personal. It wasn't applause, it was recognition. Parents who knew exactly what that moment felt like in their own lives, who had been seen in that same way by their own children and had never quite found the words for it. People who had experienced the specific and irreplaceable feeling of being loved by someone too young to have any ulterior motive. People who were reminded suddenly and sharply of what actually matters when everything else is stripped away. But the moment also carried something more complicated underneath the warmth. This was never Savannah's choice to share. It was a private exchange. It belonged to her family and to no one else. And now it was everywhere, being passed around and discussed, and held up as a symbol of something far larger than a single quiet moment between a mother and her daughter. The question that sat inside all of it was one that didn't have an easy answer. How do you respond when something that belongs entirely to your private world becomes, without your permission, a piece of public conversation? How do you feel about a moment of pure love being transformed into content, even beloved content, even content that moved people to genuine and honest tears? That tension, the space between what you protect and what the world eventually claims anyway, had been at the center of everything Savannah Guthrie had navigated her entire career. And this moment brought it into focus more sharply and more personally than anything that had come before it. What followed was worth paying close attention to because it said something important about who she actually is. Savannah Guthrie did not retreat. She didn't go quiet or issue careful, managed language through a publicist, or find a way to redirect the conversation somewhere safer. She responded the way she has always responded when something real breaks through the surface. With honesty and with warmth and with the kind of directness that has always been the foundation of why people trust her. She acknowledged the moment. She spoke about Annie with a pride and tenderness that no media strategy could have manufactured or rehearsed. And in doing so, she accomplished something quietly powerful that most people in her position would have struggled to pull off. She reclaimed the story, not aggressively, not with any visible effort to manage perception, simply by being fully present in it, by letting the love inside that moment be the loudest thing about it. And Annie, a little girl who had no awareness that she had moved millions of strangers simply by loving her mother honestly and out loud, remained exactly what she had always been: a child. A daughter, someone who existed completely and happily outside the reach of everything the world was now saying about her. The shield Savannah had always built around her children held. Even in a moment when everything briefly broke through, that fundamental protection remained intact. There is a version of this story that ends in a darker place, where a private moment becomes a lasting source of discomfort, where the intrusion leaves a mark, where the response is guarded and the trust between a public figure and her audience quietly erodes. But that is not this story. This story resolves somewhere entirely different. In a place that reveals something true and lasting about who Savannah Guthrie is beneath every broadcast, beneath every carefully delivered line of breaking news, beneath every professional achievement the outside world uses to define her. She is a mother who is deeply, visibly, unapologetically proud of her children. A woman who spent her entire career in pursuit of truth, and yet guards something truer than any story she has ever told on air. A person who, when the moment arrived and the choice was between protecting her image and letting love speak for itself, chose love. And let the world see exactly what that decision looked like in real time. Her career has continued to grow and evolve. The anchor desk, the legal analysis, the political coverage, the long-form interviews that require the full weight of everything she has built over decades. All of it reflects a woman who has never stopped becoming more fully herself. But the legacy that may linger longest, when the full arc of everything is eventually written, might have nothing to do with ratings or recognition or the history she was present for. It might be this: a daughter who looked at her mother and saw something so true and so clear that she had to say it out loud. And a mother who, when the whole world heard it, chose not to explain it or protect it or shape it into something more comfortable. She let it stand exactly as it was, unedited, unpolished. Completely true. There is something this story keeps returning to no matter how many times you sit with it. We watch public figures manage themselves constantly. We watch them shape their narratives and protect their images, and carefully decide what version of themselves belongs to the world and what stays behind closed doors. And most of the time, that management is so complete and so practiced that we forget there is a full human life happening on the other side of it. And then every once in a while something gets through, something unscripted, something unplanned. Something that carries no agenda at all because it came from someone too young and too honest to have one. Annie Guthrie wasn't trying to make a statement. She wasn't performing for an audience or seeking approval or saying what she thought people wanted to hear. She was a child watching her mother and feeling something so clearly that she simply said it. And somehow, without intending to, she reminded millions of people of something they had known all along but had briefly forgotten. that the moments that matter most are almost never the ones we carefully prepare for. So I want to leave you with a question that doesn't have a simple answer. In a world where everything eventually becomes content, where even the most private and tender moments find their way into the public conversation whether we invite them or not, what does it actually mean to protect the things that matter most? And do you think Savannah Guthrie got that balance right? Leave your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation is worth having. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something or someone in your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because the most powerful moments are almost never the ones that make the loudest headlines.